Does anyone know what we used to call the Tainos prior to calling them the Tainos? Arawaks. So the Tainos were referred to previously as Arawaks, right? And the Kalinagos were previously referred to as Caribs, right? Oh, this is all right. Okay, and the reason for that, I'll tell you, but it's in a later slide for you to write down, is that the language they spoke was Arawakan. Where did the name Taino come from? Okay, so they refer to themselves as Taino, as a Taino, which we're not exactly clear on what it means, but probably people think it means people or good or some concept of how they see themselves, right? So where researchers previously got Arawaks from is that the language that they spoke was called Arawakan, right? So for instance, it's like saying that the British people in Britain or England speak English, so they are the English, which in that case makes sense, but in this case did not, right? Because, you know, like even with English, maybe the people in England refer to themselves as the British. They have a different name for themselves, right? All right. So that's just kind of by the way. It will come up again in a later slide for you to write down, right? So let's get started with the actual content. So I'll go over what I mentioned briefly at the end of class last time. So this is just a map of settlement patterns for all indigenous people all over the world, right? So let's just make sure we're clear on that. I'm not saying this is the Taino, but I needed the map and the general arrows. So migration and settlement patterns for indigenous people worldwide, right? Every country, every region had indigenous people that settled there. All right. So now let's look at where the Taino is. So I'm going to draw that in. I would have drawn it in last week. I'm going to draw it in again. So they came across the Bering Strait. Move this up just once I move this out of the way. Right. They came across the Bering Strait, actually, and also let me make it bigger. So I'm drawing in where they went, right? So they went this way. Homo sapien means human race in this context, right? And they went down through North America. So here, you know, the Mayans would have settled on the Aztecs and the Inca would have gone here. They went into Guyana and then they went up the islands, right? Some may have reached as far as Florida, perhaps, right? But they followed basically the chain of the islands, right? So what I write in the middle, I would like you to take a note of, right? So Taino traveled as in the Tainos. All right, so I put the Tainos. So the Tainos or Taino all in this fact. The Tainos traveled through Central, then South America, right? So they also went through North America first, but we'll take that as a given, right? So America to Central, so South America, right? Then through Guyana, and into the Caribbean islands. Okay, so they are pushed northward, or they will be pushed northward by the Kalinagos or the Caribs, right? So the reason they end up going so far north into See, this island is Hispaniola, and this one is Cuba, and this one is Jamaica. The reason they end up going so far north is because the Kalinagos, who are a more of a warlike society, are pushed. They every time they are attacked, the Tainos pick up and move to another island to the north, and then the Caribs come again with another raid, and then they move to the north. Right? All right. So, are there any Tainos in Trinidad and Tobago? There may be descendants of Tainos. There are more likely descendants of Kalinagos and Caribs, because Trinidad is the island closest to, in the island chain, we are the one closest to Guyana. So the Kalinagos raided there first, pushing the Tainos up. And the Kalinagos settled in part of Trinidad. Trinidad is big compared to the other islands. So Tainos would also have remained, and Caribs would have remained by the time the Europeans came. But I believe that it's mostly descendants of Kalinagos we have, and we may have some of Tainos. Now, the island that has a fairly large Taino settlement still. All right, well, we'll get to that. So first okay, so just remember the pattern, because you could get a question on this, right, of movement. So they move south, so they go through North America, then Central America, and then into South America. They go to Guyana, so they're moving across to Guyana, and then they go up again into the islands. All right. So let me add to this. They are pushed northward. By reading Kalinagos. Right? Everybody clear on that? Anybody have questions? If you have a question, anything you don't understand, let me know, right? So I'm just waiting 2 minutes for us to make a note of this pattern of movement, right? So as a heading, what is the word after north? Northward is one, it's one word, right? Northward, they're pushed northward, or you could just say they're pushed north. What is it? Kalinagos is the word after reading. All right, so let me fix the handwriting. Right, any Kalinagos, any Caribs? Okay, so Amerindian society was not set up to fight. So they did not, when the Kalinagos raided, they did not fight to push them back. They would simply move their settlement. They would instead move their settlement, right? Is class ending at 1:30? If we make good progress, we could try and end at 1:15. Yeah, so these people are part of the group called the Amerindians. So I'm going up here to just illustrate that, right? To write it up. So the Amerindians, in the context of the Caribbean, right? Of the Caribbean islands are Tainos and Kalinagos. Right? And both sets together make up the Amerindians, who, but now we call them First Peoples, right? We also call them indigenous peoples, in recognition of the fact that they were here first. All right, anybody still writing? Okay, so a few people still writing. Okay, go ahead. Make your notes and then we'll continue. All right, so a couple of people have finished, just checking in. Anybody need more time still? All right, so I think a few people are still writing, right? So go ahead. I'll just talk a little bit for the people who are done, right? That the Tainos are mostly associated with the Greater Antilles, which are the larger islands. And those are the ones that we pointed out. So Cuba, Hispaniola, Jamaica, right? And again, the reason for that is because that is where they ended up, Puerto Rico, that is where they ended up when the Caribs pushed them out. Chances are the Caribs would have pushed them even further, or at least made it to those islands. But what happens to stop the process? So what happens to stop the process is that Christopher Columbus arrives, right? And then the Europeans are a whole other threat to their way of life. Right? On the larger islands, we'll talk about this too, like Puerto Rico and Cuba. Sorry if y'all are hearing ghost noises in the background. I promise the house is not haunted, it's just wind. Yeah, so on islands like Puerto Rico and Cuba, where there were Taino populations, they used bows and arrows. So they were able to defend their settlements a little longer against the Caribs. All right, so can we go ahead now? Okay, so I'm clearing the screen, right? All right, so we've talked about so far where they came from, the Tainos, and generally where they went to, right? So we're going to our next slide. Who were they? So as a people, this is our heading. Who were they? Now we're used to thinking of them as very docile in comparison to the Kalinagos. That's not a very nice word. I don't think we would want to be described as docile, right? But they were definitely less warlike, right? All right, so we kind of said this point already, right? So they were found on the islands from Trinidad to the Bahamas. I'm going to add a little bit here and say especially the Greater Antilles. Now, does everybody understand what I mean by Greater Antilles? Greater Antilles. Right, the larger islands, right? So in brackets, I will put Jamaica, Cuba, Hispaniola, that's the island that's Haiti and Dominican Republic together, and Puerto Rico. Right? So, and how do we know they were on these islands, even though I'm saying to you they were mostly on the Greater Antilles and further north? Well, remnants of their civilization could be found by archaeologists, researchers, people, right? So we can tell, oh, well, there used to be a Taino settlement here. All right, next point. In total, at its largest, the Tainos were about 200,000 in number. Now we remember how large we said the Mayan society was? We talked about the sizes of cities, and cities could in Mayan society, and they could easily accommodate this number of some cities, right? So the Mayans were in the millions. The Tainos were a much smaller number, right? So about 200,000 in number. All right. So we talked just now about the Kalinagos pushing the Tainos northward and pushing them out of territories, right? the Tainos themselves pushed some groups out. So the group that was there before the Tainos were known as the Cebunies. Right? So this name is very important. We want to remember that they were the group that were in the islands before the Tainos, right? The H word that I wrote up here is Hispaniola. Okay, let me write it over. Oh, wrong color. All right. Hispaniola. Right? And that is Haiti and the Dominican Republic. All right, so next point. When it came to naming their community or their settlement, okay, so the word next to Rico is Puerto Rico. Puerto, right? Let me write it back. Right, Puerto Rico. All right. So, right. Sometimes the Tainos would name their settlements after the island that they were on. So they referred to Puerto Rico as Borican, and so they call themselves the Borican. In the Bahamas, they refer to the Bahamas as Lucayo, so they call themselves the Lucayo, right? So how we researchers and historians identify the Tainos and say these are the Tainos is through the things that they shared. So even though the Borican, for example, refer to themselves as the Borican and not the Taino, or the Lucayo as the Lucayo and not the Taino, researchers will classify them as Taino because they share certain customs. So they share the same language. The language is Arawakan. Right? So just to be clear, when we say they shared a language, we mean they shared Arawakan, right? And they also shared customs and they shared ways of life. All right, so let's make a note of this. And then we'll go on to the next point. All right, guys. So some of you are finished. I was not talking. All right, a few more people are finished. Okay, let me see. Do we have any other? No, sorry. No more points on that side, right? So let me go back. Everybody's done. Anybody still writing? Anybody still writing? All right, go ahead. I can give maybe 1 more minute. So just to recap what we said so far for this slide, who were they? That's what we're trying to get from this, right? They were a group, they were people who occupied the islands from Trinidad all the way to Bahamas, which is up by Florida, right? There were about 200,000 in number in total. While they were moving northwards because a more warlike society was pushing them upwards, like it would attack them and do raids, and so they would move northward to get away from them. They themselves were driving another tribe further north, and that tribe was the Cebunies. So that's important for us to remember, right? A lot of the tribes, as they moved, they pushed people northward. They came and they settled there and they pushed other people who were there before. Nowadays, if you think about people coming to a nation or an area where another group lives, it's the opposite that happens. They are in the minority. But back then, things were reversed, right? We remember that the next point is that they call themselves after the island. So whatever their name for the island was, that's where they got their name for themselves, right? And they are called the Taino because they had a similar language, similar customs, similar ways of living. All right, so if you didn't get any notes from this, you need to screenshot it so we can move on. Okay, so I'm counting to 10 and I'm going to change the slide. How did they push people out? Okay, that's a good question. Well, I can't tell you specifically how they pushed the Cebunies out, but I can tell you how the Kalinagos would have pushed the Tainos out. So the Tainos like to build settlements on the coast, and they did not have a large number of weapons. The weapons that they did have were for helping them to hunt small game. So they might have had like some knives or daggers, but nothing too dangerous. The Caribs, however, how they survived was by doing raids. That's part of how they got what they needed to subsist. Okay, so the Kalinagos had weapons. They had arrows. They had clubs with sharp flint on the ends of the club, right? So like if you get hit with the club, it's a spiky end, so that could seriously injure or kill somebody, right? So the Kalinagos would raid the coastal settlement, and the Tainos would pack up their things, get in a canoe. The Caribs would also get in a canoe in order to get to the island to read it, and the Tainos would get their things together, pack up a canoe, and move to a different island. All right, so when I say push people north, that's what I mean. They come, they attack, they fight, and then the society moves north. As to whether or not the Taino did that with the Cebunies, I don't think so. I think it's just that they perhaps outnumbered them. Perhaps there was some fighting, but not on the same level as when the Caribs would have fought with the Tainos. The Kalinagos would have fought with the Tainos, sorry. All right, so I need to change the screen now. So I'm hoping that you screenshotted whatever you need to, right? All right. Next thing, so we're talking about the settlements now. So I would have just said that they settled on the coast of the island. So if you think of the island of Trinidad, if Tainos were going to settle here, and they come in from Guyana, perhaps they would settle on a coastal area in south. Perhaps they might settle in Port of Spain because that's like on a coastal area in a harbor. Perhaps they might have reached Manzanilla or Mayaro. So think of the beachy areas. And for every island, it's the beachy areas they're settling on. They don't go too far inland. All right, so they are coastal settlements, the Taino settlements, right? Every 5 years or so, they would move anyway. So apart from the Taino coming to raid them, every 5 years or so, they would move anyway. And the reason, so because of that, they build temporary settlements, temporary shelters. Not like the Mayan who erected pyramids, who track the movements of the sun, and the sun doesn't move. The planets and the moon and the stars. And so they erected pyramids to take advantage of that. Not like that, right? They are different. They live here 5 years and then they move on. So they build maybe they build a hut with a thatched roof, something temporary, right? Why do they move every 5 years? Because of their agricultural practices. So mainly their shelters that they build are temporary and to keep off rain. So I will mention this here, but we will come to it in more detail just now, right? It's every 5 years because of agriculture. What agricultural technique do you think they use that would make them have to move every 5 years? The Mayan people had a surplus of agriculture. They would get a surplus of crops because they figured out how to keep being able to use the same area that they had, or maybe they had more landmass available to them, right? But yes, okay, so Ezekiel has it, slash and burn. The Taino used slash and burn. So when you slash and burn an area and then you plant, you could only plant there for so long before you exhaust the soil, right? So they would plan to move every 5 years or so to get a new area for their crops, right? Which are mostly things like cassava, but we'll get to that just now, right? All right, so they settled in villages. So not towns, not chiefdoms, it's a village. That gives us the idea of less developed, less built up, right? More rural, right? Where inhabitants are generally related. So everybody's related to each other because they're traveling like as a tribe, right? And the ruler of the village is a chieftain. A chieftain, right? And that person inherits the position. So the person is male and inherit the position, right? Oops, next point here. Right, so their houses that they make, remember, they're kind of temporary. So they're round and they have thatched roofs. The roof will be kind of steep and has to keep off rain. The house for the chief will be a little distinguished. It'll be different. It will be rectangular and it will have several different rooms in it as a mark of his structure, right? Now, another part of the village will be where they keep another building, will be where they keep the gods that they worship. And priests would be able to go there to make offerings and so, right? There may have been a type of ball court at the center. Sorry, let me go back here. For a ball game that they would have played, right? All right, so these are just some general points about their settlements and how they tended to organize their space, right? So I'm giving us a few minutes. Let's see if we can get done with this in 3 minutes at the most. And I'm muting myself. You could shorten the points, that's no problem. Okay, a few people have indicated that they're done. So let's see if 1 more minute, and then I'll change the slide, right? So if you need to take a screenshot within that minute to finish, right? So 1 more minute. Okay, so I think I'm gonna have to move on, right? So I'm counting to 10. I'm changing the slide, right? Okay. All right, so we're talking about Tainos society now, how they were organized. So there were some jobs for women and some jobs for men. All right. So what do you think the jobs were for women? Let me hear. Yes, okay, yes, great. All the domestic things, right? All right. So the jobs for women, we'll make a list here, right? So it would be things like cooking and food preparation, right? It would be things like childcare. It would also be things like weaving. So the Taino were very good at weaving baskets. Right. Yeah, okay, so childcare, including flattening babies' foreheads. Yeah, okay. Preparing, so by cooking, we will put preparing cassava, or as they call it, manioc, right? And Armenians are also known for a particular dish. What is the dish? Pepper pot, right? Do we know what pepper pot is? Yeah, they did also make a cassava bread. Right, so pepper pot is like a kind of a stew where you put your bits of provisions as well as any bits of meat that you happen to have, and you leave it on the fire, and the flavors would build and it could stay on the fire for days, weeks even, and somehow not give anybody food poisoning, but yeah. Yeah, it's like an oil down, but it's like, because they have no refrigerator, right? So we put the oil on the fridge when it's done cooking, but theirs stays on the stove. So it's not like they empty the pot or wash the pot. It stays on the stove, and people keep adding, community adds things that to make it tasty, right? And to be fair, like, I think a lot of cultures have a vision of this dish. Like the British, you know, that nursery rhyme, peas porridge, hot peas porridge, cold peas porridge in a pot 9 days old. It literally is porridge that would have stayed on a fire in a pot that could have been in there for 9 days, and every day they might add a little bit of a vegetable or something to it, and then eat from it, and then add to it, and so on, right? So it sounds like a version of pepper pot, but not as tasty. Anyway, so cooking, childcare, weaving, pepper pot, those are the different types of cooking. Okay, so now they also have a role in agriculture. And we want to make sure we understand this, right? So I'm gonna put this, let me draw a line so it doesn't get mixed up, right? Okay, so they this is poking. So let me explain the process and then maybe this will make a little more sense. So remember we said slash and burn is the agriculture they use, right? So the men would clear the area. That might mean cutting a little bit of the foliage and burning it, or vice versa, burning it, then cutting down whatever stumps remain. The woman will then go to the plot of land that has been cleared. They will poke holes in the ground with sticks. So this is a version of tilling the soil. Right, so you poke holes in the ground with sticks and you plant cassava. All right, so you plant usually cassava. Right? All right. Okay, then there was some jobs for men. So what are the jobs for men? They are mainly hunting, fishing, and well, clearing the land for farming. So also in agriculture, but clearing land for farming. Oh yes, also building canoes, right? I shouldn't call this crafts. Let me call this skill paper. Well, let me just put building canoes. Right? So they would cut down a tree trunk. They would hollow out the middle, right? And they would use wedges of wood, stick them into the hollow to stretch the canoe. Right? And then they would temper it. They might keep it in the sun, they might bury it in the sand to help it maintain the shape and to make the canoe, right? So it was a very it required some skill labor. So let me give you a chance to get all of this, because when I put out the next point, it will probably overlap with the writing, right? So we want to remember that kind of just like in Mayan society, the work in Tainos society is what we would say is gendered. As in women have certain things to do and men have certain things to do. Is work in our society gendered? Are there certain jobs that only women do and certain jobs that only men do? Think about it. It's not as clear a distinction as it was before, because even like if you think of childcare, more and more fathers take a role in childcare. They may change the baby, bathe the baby. But in a lot of homes, is there someone who does the bulk of the housework? So it's possible in a lot of, oh, somebody is saying me, sorry. I sympathize. In a lot of homes, it's still the women that do the bulk of the domestic work, right? But even though it's not like, I mean, even though men could do it, but I don't know, this happens in a lot of homes I know where the men have to be asked to do things, whereas the women kind of take it upon themselves to plan, okay, well, we need a grocery trip, we need to get this for the baby, this needs to be cleaned, and so on. I don't know. I'm just talking here. I'm just asking. Yeah, some jobs are stereotyped as certain genders roles, like taking out the rubbish is the man's job in the house. But washing the wares anybody might do, if we're lucky. 90% of soldiers are men, okay. But they don't have to be men, right? Women have the option to join the military. According to Google. Well, it probably is true. In a lot of societies, the women have the option to join the military. In some countries, women have to join the military. All people of a certain age have to serve in the military for a period of time, right? Male or female. Okay, so in our small talk, are we finished with this, with these examples? I can clear the screen. We could get through this slide and then take a break, right? All right, so next point, which we said before, the chief is an inherited position. The chieftain's position was hereditary. So it goes the elder son of the chief. This should be eldest. I'm not sure why I put elder. The eldest son of the chief. But if he has no sons, then it's the son of his sister, right? That the chiefship passes to, right? And because of that, because the inheritance is through the sister, right? The other son of his sister, not like a younger brother or so, right? But the son of his sister, then it makes us think of Tainos society as matriarchal because it favors the female line of descendants. All right, any questions you can put in the chat, but I'll give us a minute to note this, right? Before we go to the next one. If his sister doesn't have a son and he doesn't have a son, I guess the next male relative. I'm not sure. I didn't find any examples for that. All right, so if there's no son or male, no, I don't think there are. I'm trying to remember. I didn't come across any examples of females taking on the leadership, but I could double check. Okay, so someone is remembering an example of a woman leading in Tainos. So I'll double check. Yeah. All right, let's go to the next point, right? So all of the items that the tribe uses are shared items. But some items, for instance, the ones that pertain to women's work will be shared by the woman, and other items that pertain to the men's work will be shared by the man, right? So we said that each village was led by a chieftain or a cacique. There was an instance or a couple instances after the Europeans came when a cacique brought a few villages together in the face of a threat, right? So, but we will look at that when we talk about Europeans. Okay, so let me go back. So because the items are all shared, they are seen as property of everybody. So theft is a very severe offense. Right. Okay, so it's 12:29. Let's say we take about 3 minutes to finish the note, and then we take a 5-minute break. So if anybody is finished with the note and they want to go and break early, they can. So let's plan to start back at 12:38 or so. And I'll check in if anybody needs a couple of minutes extra. I can do that then, right? All right, so Hassan, I saw your thing about the not getting to screenshot the writing. At the end of the break, I'll try and see if I can go back to it through using Control-Z if it will let me. And you can screenshot it before we start back, right? All right, so I'm muting myself, but I'm right here if you have questions. And you can, and I'm pausing the recording, so somebody will have to remind me to start. I'm going to the next slide. So we're looking now at how they organize their agriculture and labor. Some of it we've already discussed. So there was slash and burn. The men would set the fire, and the woman would poke the holes with the sticks to plant, usually cassava, right? Besides cassava, so now if you've already noted the thing on top about the men setting the fire and the woman poking the holes with the sticks, then you don't need to write it again, right? But you do want to note slash and burn under this heading. Besides cassava, which for some reason I did not put on this list, they also planted corn, maize. Well, corn is maize, right? Maize is the other name for corn. Sweet potatoes, hot peppers, cotton, and tobacco, right? Yeah, the recording has started now. I don't know if we realize that the Tainos are the ones who gave us tobacco, well, and cotton, I suppose. As in the sense that the Europeans came here, saw that these were profitable or could be profitable, and decided they were going to try to plant it on a large scale. Right? Let me write in cassava, because for some reason I think I meant to write cassava here. Which is also referred to as manioc. All right. Now they were into agriculture, but basically all they did was they supplied their own needs. They didn't have a lot of surplus to trade with other Taino tribes or other people in the Caribbean, right? So that's important. Unlike the Mayans, who had a whole lot of surplus, and because they had so much surplus, they were able also to differentiate their professions, and you could have a rich class emerging and merchants and so on, right? So they did not have a large surplus. They only had a little bit extra that they didn't use, didn't consume themselves, right? They supplemented what they grew with fish, because remember they're a coastal settlement. So fish that they catch, also shrimp, shellfish, and so on that they would scoop up from the ocean, and small birds for on the island, right? So they would go out in their canoes and they would cast fishing lines and they would catch fish. They also kept a small dog as a domestic pet, but they would also eventually eat this pet, right? They would fatten him up and then eat him. It was seen as a delicacy. And before we judge them, we also keep not dogs, but other animals as pets, goats, cows, that we then want, chickens that we then want to eat, right? They're not quite as domesticated as we have like cats and dogs, but some of us get attached to our pet goats and our pet lambs, pet sheep, pet chickens, and then they become food, right? Yeah, this is a little disturbing to us, though, right? Someone is saying no. I had a friend in secondary school who grew up well with farm animals now. And she was talking about a lamb being born. And I said something, oh, that must be so cute. And she said, well, we try not to get attached to our animals because they usually end up as food. So I guess maybe the Tainos also the same. All right. Some of the items that they did trade are here. So tools, obsidian, there's that semi-precious metal again, gold, cloth that they themselves would weave, right? And pineapples. Now, every single island didn't trade all of these, right? Specific islands would have had specialties. Okay, and they would go from island to island by canoe. So you would remember that the Mayans, when they had trade, they were going over land to get to other tribes, other cities rather, not tribes. So they would have slaves, and these slaves, they would load up the slaves physically with all the goods that they were going to trade, and they would walk, right? In a caravan, meaning a whole long line of people. But the Tainos, they're on islands, so they go from island to island by canoe to trade, right? Okay, let me go back here. So this is, right, so let's finish up our points from this. All right, anybody still writing? All right, one more minute, right? So try and screenshot anything that you didn't get to write down or plan to come back to the recording, right? All right, so we need to move on, right? All right, so our reward for coming to class on a Friday will be that we get to finish a little earlier. So we're looking at Tainos skills and crafts. So what are the things that we've already mentioned? Some we mentioned basket weaving, we mentioned the canoes. All right, so they made the canoe, they would hollow it out, they would cut on a tree, they would hollow it out. To stretch the inside of the canoe, they would put pieces of wood, right? It would need to be passed over a fire, it would need to be buried in sand to harden the wood of the canoe. I'm not a professional canoe maker, so I can't tell you exactly how long each step would take, but that's generally processed, right? So besides that, they also made fish hooks, because remember they were into fishing. And they had a lot of other techniques that they would use to get fish. So let me go over one of those. They would use remoras, the fish that would, the sucker fish, that would attach to things, like how a suction cup would attach to something. So they might use the remora to catch turtles, and then they would be able to pull the turtle into the canoe, right? What else? So they're very skilled in weaving. I remember we said cloth was one of the things they used for trade. So they would make cloth from weaving. Now, do we have a general understanding of how that process goes? You have the cotton. You harvest the cotton, you spin it into fibers or threads, and then you literally weave them together to make cloth, right? So it's a very time-consuming process. It requires skilled labor. You have to know what you're doing to do it well, and so on, right? They also made baskets. Their baskets were so well done that they could be used to carry water. I can't remember right now if there's a scene with weaving in Moana, but it's possible there was. All right, so they made by weaving plants together and fibers together, they could create baskets that were so tightly woven they could carry water, right? Okay, they also made pottery, just like the Mayans did. All right, but their pottery, they decorated it with pictures of animals from nature, and it wasn't glazed. It didn't have that kind of shiny surface that other cultures pottery did, right? But what you were likely to find on it would be animals like birds or turtles or frogs. Right? Things that they would see on the island. So these things that these crafts and these craft items that they produce with their skilled labor are things that they would trade. Right? Okay, sorry, let me go back. All right, any questions about skills and crafts that they had? And Tainos didn't wear a lot of clothes, even though they are creating cloth, they didn't wear a lot of clothing. They did decorate their bodies with clay, a mixture of colorful clay. Yes, they ate turtles. And another purpose for that was to help keep mosquitoes off. Yeah. They would put red dye into the clay. I mean, colorful patterns. All right, so let's see if in 2 minutes we can have these points noted. Okay, a number of people have indicated that they're done. Oh, we got some extra time there, right? Yeah, I think class will still finish early. All right, because remember, we have an extra Monday because originally Sir and I had planned not to have class today, but then we forgot because we're old. We forgot to tell people, so we ended up having class, right? So we will end up with an extra Monday history class. So whereas everybody else gets 4 sessions, we will get 5. So we can finish a little early today and still finish what we're going to do, right? All right, so I'm moving on. Taino religious beliefs we're talking about now. All right, so remember, so far we've said that they have a separate building for their gods in the village, right? All right, so what was their religion like? Well, it was a mixture of worshiping nature, but also worshiping their ancestors, right? As well as they had some magic involved in order to, that they saw as it would protect them. Like how some people might think Obia might protect them, and it might. Which, by the way, Obia is an actual religion, as aside and apart from all the popular culture thoughts about it. All right, but anyway, back to the Tainos. They believed in nature, they believe in worshiping nature and their ancestors, and in doing magic. Their priests did some magic as well. Next point, in terms of their gods, what they believed there was a sky god and there was an earth goddess, which is not so different from if you think about in Greek mythology, before Zeus's parents, there is an earth goddess, Rhea, and there's a god of the sky, whose name I can't remember right now. It's his father. Right, so the sky god and the earth goddess are far away, right? The people who are close are the nature gods and the ancestor spirits. And they are the ones who control things like the weather, so the elements, right? They control whether people are sick, whether they are healthy. They control an individual's luck. So if someone is lucky, it's big thanks to something that a god or a nature spirit did, right? If someone is unlucky, they've probably displeased a nature god or a spirit of their ancestor. Right? Okay, so in terms of representing their gods, they were called Cebunies. There's an extra S in represented here. Right? Their figures were called Cebunies. And they were kept in the Cebuni house, that separate building. And the priests would go there and they would make offerings to them. The Taino also used tobacco. They also grew tobacco. So the priests would consume tobacco, get high, as we would say in current culture, and then go into a trance. And in the trance, they would be able to communicate with the god or the spirit. What did they believe about death? So they didn't see death as something to be afraid of. They thought that for a while, though, after the body died, the soul would stick around and they would wander around the island or the community or the village. And what they would eat is a mami apple. Do we know what a mami apple is? So in the Taino society, that particular fruit was never eaten. I'll look for a picture of it in a little bit and show you. Right after we're done with this slide. They would never eat mami apples in Taino society because they believed it was the food of the dead. So after the soul was there for a while, it would go to an island in the south where it would be reunited with ancestors, and that was a happy place that it would go to, right? Okay, so this is a quick little snapshot here of what they believed religious-wise. All right, how are we going? You still writing? All right, so some people are finished. Let's give this, do we say 1 more minute? And then if you're not finished, you can screenshot it. And then we just want to look at some pictures and we'll wrap up, right? All right, so can I change the slide? I'm counting to 10. Yeah, okay, this should be a sky god here instead of on. Sorry about that, right? All right, so we're changing the slide. There are some words that I just want us to be aware of came from Taino society. Any of you know, some of you probably know some of them. There are some words we use today that have come from the Taino. Trinidad in particular should be paying them royalties. We use these words a lot, some of them. Okay, well, I mentioned already that the Taino were cultivating tobacco and the Europeans met them here growing it, right? So tobacco. Now it's not that the word tobacco was a Taino word, this is what the word has evolved from. Canoe is another one. Hurricane came from a word in Taino language, right? And this is the one that Trinidad should pay royalties for, barbecue, right? Based on how a method they had for cooking meat, some of the small game that they caught. Okay, so these words in English have evolved from Taino versions. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do, which will just take us a few minutes, is to look at some pictures. So I'm going to stop the recording now before we look at the pictures for copyright reasons. So on your own, if you are going through the recording, you could look for pictures of mommy apples for one. But I'll just put Taino culture broadly. You can put that into Google and see what you get, right? But I want to look at mommy apples. No, tobacco is not sweet potato. Tobacco is itself. We could look up a picture for tobacco if you want. It's a different plant and the leaves are harvested, and that is what is processed, becomes cigarettes, becomes cigars, and so on. So mommy apples, I want to look at. I want us to see a picture of some Cebunies. We might also look for pottery, canoes, but we're looking for Taino pottery and Taino canoes, right? And we'll also look for tobacco, just so we can see what the plant looks like. So if you are doing the recording, the last thing for you to do is just look for some pictures of these so you can have some references. I'm stopping the recording here.